Hey, it's Anne. We're making today's full episode free for everyone. That means there are no ads and no juicy bits tucked behind a paywall. If you want to join the ranks of paid subscribers so you can always get the full ad-free episode plus all the bonus stuff, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's only $5 a month, or if you're already a Culture Study subscriber, it's actually only $3 a month. It's a really great deal. Think of it as like an add-on subscription. And what you're doing is you're making the show sustainable. The reason we have this as a separate Substack is because everything that we make from the show is divided straight down the middle between me and Melody, and having it on a separate Substack allows us to do that sort of straight profit sharing. It's really awesome. It's not how most people do it in the business, but it's the way that we wanted to do it. You make it possible for us not to be connected to a massive media conglomerate where we might be canceled at any moment and where there's a lot less control over the types of episodes that we want to do. You make the show possible. And right now, we have made enough to pay Melody through, I think, like the end of June. So if more of you subscribe, and you can also do a yearly subscription, that's a lot easier, you'll help us keep making this pod for even longer. Okay, now on with the show.
I think for a lot of people, when she first appeared on the Grammys red carpet, obviously with Midnights being the thing that she was supposed to be, she was nominated for and that was going to be honored for that evening, and all of these clues that we can now see as red herrings of Reputation Taylor's version kind of looming over her, and lots of people anticipating or thinking that we would be getting an announcement about that. For her to have appeared that night in this, bedsheet tangled up white gown, a lot of people were like doing a double take of like, well, I guess I can see how that works for Reputation, trying to
like shoehorn it into Reputation.
Correct. Yeah. Trying to shoehorn it into, our expectations of what we thought would happen in the evening. But if, Taylor Swift is going to do one thing and one thing well is subvert expectations.
This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
My name is Sarah Chappelle. I am a journalist and also a veteran Swiftie style reporter, and I have a fashion account dedicated to Taylor Swift's style. It's an Instagram account, Taylor Swift Styled, and also a blog, taylorswiftstyle.com. And as a result, I have had the wonderful opportunity to write a book all about it.
Amazing. I feel like a good place for us to start. And I have to say that a lot of these ideas about good places to start come from our resident Swiftie. I mean, I love Taylor Swift, but like Melody loves Taylor Swift. And she really comes to this with so much knowledge that I appreciate really so deeply. But so Melody's idea was like, what if we start by looking at Taylor's Grammy look and thinking about how you interpreted it at the time and maybe how you interpret it now?
Yeah, that look is really interesting because Taylor has definitely used red carpets in the past to kind of serve as a launch board for the aesthetic of a new era. And so, of course, as we now know, that look was meant to tee up Tortured Poets. And it's very interesting to look back on that look now, especially now that we have this album and obviously also the corresponding album visuals, the Fortnight music video, and how that really kind of teed us up very nicely for, there's so many, kind of interpretations of this look, whether you want to look into the tangled bed sheets kind of intimacy, because this album, I would say, is definitely, the lyricism is like more sensual and more overtly sexual than, we've seen from her in the past. So there's a certain intimacy, vulnerability feeling there. One of the coolest things about observing her style is the intention that comes with it, but also the different ways that you can read it.
I'm also looking at her look from the Grammys right now, and it's glamour, right? In terms of like old Hollywood glamour, both with the gloves that go up like to her mid bicep, the cut in the dress that goes all the way up her thigh, which is a very like old Hollywood glam sort of style. And even the hair, like there's kind of a Veronica like wave going on, like with her side sweep.
She's done that in the past, like the old Hollywood glam wave, and she's done it more effectively. This one feels way messier, which I think is also kind of a neat tie-in to how intrinsically messy this album is, like beautifully messy. And also the through line of she's been wearing a single kind of braid in her hair all throughout last summer when she was, entering and exiting Electric Lady Studios in New York, where she was presumably recording a lot of this album. She had a tiny little braid throughout her hair, and that was present at the Grammys too, which I thought was very interesting. And also obviously the kind of Clairbeau stacked necklaces too. Yeah.
Say more about that, about why does that evoke Clairbeau? Because I have my thoughts about why, but what do you think?
I mean, I don't have like as deep a knowledge of Clairbeau as, so I've only seen, the portraiture of her with like the kind of stacked necklaces. I really liked how that was also evoked in the Fortnight music video, and how it doubly sort of serves as, she uses a watch face in the choker. And I personally really liked how that kind of puts a stop on the Midnights era and then ushers in and connects us as like a through line into this next era. I also think that there was like an Emily Dickinson poem or something about stopping time.
Yeah.
Which there's tortured poets obviously all over this album, and I thought that was like sort of an interesting possible interpolation too.
Yeah. When I look at this too, you're totally right about the style of the stack necklaces, but also just like, this 1920s silent film. Like Clairbeau was only pictured in black and white films. And like there is some slippage going on with all these different eras, which is fascinating because Taylor Swift herself is known for eras. Like there's an evocation of 1830s, right? Which she's talked about as like, if you take away the racism and all the other bad stuff, like it's a cool time, which I would actually fight about. And then this 1920s, and then also like just like an overall romantic, classical, but also messy, right? So there's just like a lot of different collage, I think, going on with the look, which also, to me, that describes the album in some ways too. Some people are like, every song sounds the same to me, and I don't feel like that.
It's really interesting to hear that kind of critique, and I get it. Like that's totally fine if, something that you don't enjoy is when you're listening to an album as a body of work is like all the things kind of smush into one kind of congealed thing, and you can't really discern differences between everything, and that's not really for you. That's totally cool. But in particular with Taylor, that's a really interesting criticism because, one of the main points of critique with Red was how frenetic the album was and how it felt really disjointed, and it felt really off-putting to, go from a song like Treacherous, which is, this really beautiful, lovely kind of sweeping building ballad, into I Knew You Were Trouble, which is, a dubstep downbeat. And then you transition from I Knew You Were Trouble to All Too Well, which, beautiful sweeping magnum opus of a breakup song. And a lot of people felt like, oh, that was really disjointed and really kind of weird. And so her, direct response was, I'll create, the most polished pop album that you've ever heard and call it 1989. And it'll go on to become this watershed moment for me in my musical evolution. So for people to, say like, Tortured Poets particularly feels too same is like really fascinating for me. I don't feel that. I know, right? I don't feel that way, but like I just think like within, the growth of her discography, that's such a fascinating kind of critique. Like we've come full circle. With it.
Totally.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back because I want to talk more about your book and just about the idea of Taylor Swift communicating via fashion.
Yeah.
She's always communicating via her music, but she's also always communicating via fashion. So from a broad perspective, how does she use fashion choices beyond just like clothing itself?
When you look at female pop stars, I think a lot of them feel the pressure of reinvention as, brought to us by Madonna.
Yep.
And I mean, Madonna definitely pioneered the erification of her work. But I think in terms of modern day, nobody is like quite hitting it as successfully and as like kind of broadly as Taylor is. I mean, there's a 3-hour stadium tour dedicated to, you know, the way that she's very creatively, succinctly, clearly delineated her entire career. And, you know, I just think as this generation's, you know, most prolific songwriter, I just think we're really familiar with like the confessional, emotional songs about her life. But I just always thought that her style is half of that story. And, you know, her music is the sonic representation of her story. And then the other half is the visual half that iconifies every era. And, you know, that makes moments memorable. And I think the beauty of her music is that I can hear a song of hers and remember exactly where I was when I first heard it. I can remember what I was wearing. I can remember the weather of the day. I can remember like a fight that I had with like a friend or some, like there are just so many. And I think that that's the beauty of music, is the transportive quality to it. And I think that more than any, like her discography and her music contains that power. But then the other half of it for her is, you know, distilling those moments, not just like for your life, but also like her life, so that you can pull back through her career and say like, oh, I remember the first time she wore Ray-Bans and like what that represented for that era. You know what I'm like? I remember, I can vividly remember the first time that she wore a crop top in New York City. And that was the launch of like the 1989 era fashion. And so it's, you know, doubling down on creating this like language, not just of like music, but also that visual component and blending the two into this memory cycle.
Yeah. And I think she also speaks loudly, you know, and this is semiotics, the study of signs. It's like thinking about how something like a fashion choice can speak about how she's conceiving of herself in relationship to notions of femininity, notions of romance, notions of the past and storytelling. And I think about like she is not photographed if she doesn't want to be photographed. This is something that I think sometimes people miss, is that anytime that we are seeing a photograph of her, it's because she wants to be seen. She has a very, very good security team and knows how to be private when she wants to be private. So if you see her on the street, if you see a picture that looks casual, and I don't think she actually like, she's not like calling the paparazzi. It's more that like when she steps out in public spaces, she knows she will be photographed. So she is also careful to be styled, right? Like to speak when she leaves her wherever she is, because she knows it will speak for her in some capacity. And so I think about like the way her hair always is, right? Or like she wears a lot of tights, goes through periods where she wears a lot of tights, or like right now, just like so much street style, or what I think of as street style, because I'm an old person. So anything that like, oh, I could never pull that off, that to me like signifies a street style to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like what's something that you feel like when she wears it speaks really loudly to you, or like even a way that she styles her hair or something like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many examples throughout her career where, you know, I think not only is it speaking to that memory piece and, you know, creating this visual moment in which to anchor herself so that you can look back on and reflect it, but, you know, also what is she trying to silently communicate before the music can speak for her? And I think, you know, that's a huge thing throughout her whole career. I'll like pull back like all the way to the beginning, for example, like her. And I talk about this at length, like in the book throughout, you know, capturing all of her musical evolution, her fashion evolution, and everything that she's trying to, you know, say about herself through these visual components. But going back all the way to, you know, debut when she's this, you know, teenage country star, at that time, I mean, her closest contemporary would have been like LeAnn Rimes in that respect of somebody really young, intercepting in a predominantly older male space. But even LeAnn Rimes, like the whole Blue was popular and like was notable because LeAnn Rimes had a voice that did not sound like it belonged to a teenage girl. Yeah. And that's what made it notable. Taylor comes along and creates an entire world, and a defiant one, where she is like, I am a teenage girl. I am writing from a teenage girl's perspective. This is important, and nobody in this genre is talking about it and taking it seriously and creating space for a whole demographic of people who could possibly be enjoying this genre. So I'm going to do it. And, she does that beautifully, like on the album itself, documenting, high school crushes and saying goodbye to your college boyfriend, like when you're still stuck in high school, and all of these, things about that experience and what that means for, young girls. And she does it wearing a sundress and cowboy boots. And that is like an elevator pitch of an outfit that says, I'm a young girl and I sing country music. And that's, right. and then to kind of top it all off, she would often use guitars by this brand called Taylor Guitar. So if you see a photograph of Taylor from that time period, you're seeing her curly blonde hair, guitar that says Taylor on the neck, cute little sundress, cowboy boots. You can immediately say, that girl's name is Taylor. She sings country music. She's a young female. And like that, without saying a word, without even having heard her music. And that is like visual mathematics, creating like a easily identifiable and very easily replicable formula for her fashion, because that's not just something that she can replicate time and time again as like a uniform dress plus cowboy boots. That's also something that her fans can easily replicate. I can go into any mall, find a cute little dress, find cowboy boots, and you immediately know who I am trying to replicate, whose style I am referencing. And you don't need to, have the exact designer that she is wearing, but you're able to immediately make that, connection of reference. And that's her magic.
So one of the questions that we got a lot of that I just, instead of doing a single question about it, Taylor appears somewhere and you get the image and you're able to source where her outfit or her sunglasses or her banana clip, like you're able to source it so quickly. So how do you do it?
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing this since 2011, so I have a little bit of practice.
Yeah. You have a skill set. Yes.
Yeah, I have a very highly specific catered skill set. Yes. It can absolutely vary depending on the item in question and, the context that it's displayed in. And also helpfully, like the quality of imagery is always like a really nice thing in order to be able to deduce what an item is. Yes. Some things are definitely made easy depending on how discerning they are. Like, for instance, a Gucci Diamante bag is pretty easy to spot. Other times it can be obvious from just the fabric involved or the cut of something. One of the things about Taylor's fashion that I love and that I think a lot of fans love is how relatable and accessible her style is. And, she definitely has brands that she favors and that she goes to time and time again. And for me and my eye, there are certain like silhouettes, fabrics, patterns, cuts, and they just have a distinctive style, which is exactly what you want. Like as a brand, to be able to have somebody say, see an item and be able to recognize it. I mean, we can't all be Christian Louboutin and like there's a red sole and you just immediately know. So there are certain things that are, there are certain things that are a little bit more subtle than that. But that's the goal, I think, of every fashion designer, is to find an avenue and for people to be able to recognize and see your art and your work and attach it to you. So some items, it can be like a matter of minutes. Sometimes it's hours or days. Sometimes it's even years. Like there was a navy Fair Isle sweater that she wore like many moons ago, and it took me 3 years to find it. It's still like,
but you found it.
It still haunts me, like how long it took to find it. But yeah, so it can depend.
Well, it's like a language that you're fluent in, right? Like you are fluent in the language of contemporary design. So when you see a cut or a style, like you can like look at a couple different collections or that sort of thing. So today we're talking about the new album, The Tortured Poets Department. Yeah. And the easiest way that we could do this is like, well, this song is about this person. And like, why does she keep collaborating with Jack Antonoff? And like, everything is about that right now. And I think that like, people can go, we'll put some links to some stuff if people want to go deeper in those directions. I think that because we're so lucky to have you on the show, we want to think more about the way that she's using lyrics, fashion, the release schedule, all of these things to communicate things differently about her image. And she's doing it, I think, very skillfully, right? Like there's a reason she is arguably, I mean, her and Beyonce, like, I think periodically change slots, right? Like it's like they hand the crown back and forth from one another in
Yeah,
terms
it's
of like
beautiful.
the most important pop stars of our generation and of our era. But they both, I think, are emblematic of our era in different ways, and also emblematic of the music industry and different practices within the music industry. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on for this episode. When did you start to see a shift in Taylor's wardrobe as she was hinting this new era? Was it before the Grammys appearance?
Yeah, I think when over the course of the summer, when we received the most amount of street candids of her, it was interesting to note a lot of similarities in past polls from previous iterations of Taylor's style. And I think that that's one thing that's really interesting is that, you know, I often get people asking, well, like, what's the true Taylor style? You know, if she's constantly dressing up as different eras, like, how do you know what her actual taste is if it's all just pseudo costuming for her next project? And what I think is interesting is that I feel like Taylor's style, there are certain through lines in her fashion that I think are present regardless of era. And that's kind of what I was picking up on last summer. You know, Taylor is somebody who she loves, you know, a cute pleated miniskirt, and she always has.
Yep.
Girl loves her clunky little chunky loafers and and like heeled Oxfords, and she always has. But there were certain things. It's really funny doing Easter eggs. I feel like I most excel in being able to, you know, do the look back and the retrospect of like picking up on the things in the past, and not so much in the active present moment of noticing things as they happen. And that's by design. That's what she's doing on purpose. So it's interesting looking back, you know, seeing certain things that, you know, kind of stack out. The jewelry stacking was wildly different for her, which is also interesting given the Clara bow and like the jewelry stacking on the Grammys red carpet. That was very interesting and like out of pocket for her typically. The bustier style corsety sorts of tops was also kind of a thinker for a moment there. Those things all kind of came together. And then also new brands kind of kept popping up. Her reaching for the row more and more was interesting and notable for me. You know, this introduction of more quiet luxury, if we want to, you know, if that term is still cool to use. I feel like
it's just luxury. It's not quiet luxury.
Luxury sans logo, if they, you know, So those kinds of things were also interesting for me to note. And, you know, she obviously went on to wear the row in the Tortured Poets album photo shoot. And then she also wore the row in the Fortnight music video. So certain brands also representing as kind of a key indicator of the era that we're in.
Okay, so let's get into the listener questions. This first one is from Lauren.
Is Taylor perpetually 2 years late to an aesthetic, like with Dark Academia? Is the whole point of Taylor to be intentionally cringe? Or is she just so millennially chuggy that she can't help it?
Okay, so as you pointed out earlier, she has liked the loafers and that style for like a while.
Yeah.
Right? Like she's not like, ooh, Dark Academia, let's do it. So I think to me, it looks like what her style is for Tortured Poets is kind of like an amalgamation of like some of the other previous styles, like the preppiness, the like academia style, and then make it a little darker. I don't know. What are your thoughts here?
I mean, in many ways, yes. I think there's a cohort of fans, and this is my theory, who she's acquired in the last few years who maybe have a different idea or concept of Taylor Swift human being, either based on the works that they've exposed themselves to, or maybe not being as embedded in the lore and the journey. But as somebody who has lovingly and frankly, I just think we could all stand to embrace and feel more comfortable with our inner cringe. And if we want to uphold Taylor Swift as an avatar of somebody who embraces and is a champion of cringe, I think that is beautiful and wonderful. I also think that Taylor selectively participates in trends when she wants to.
Mm-hmm.
And she'll often, bend them to the extent of which she wants to take part. I would also argue that the 70s aesthetic for Midnights was perfectly timed to that particular trend's resurgence. So I think sometimes she nails it. And I'll lastly say that I think that there's also an entire business economy in Taylor's fashion choices, and those in themselves result in trends on their own that are, recognizable, easily traceable to her in its origin. And I think much in the same way that, the current Princess of Wales sets the world on fire. Like, she doesn't set the world on fire with her style. But when she wears something, people will come and the people will sell it out within hours, like if not, minutes. I've heard from so many, independent small designers who Taylor wears, which I think is also a huge part of her intentional dressing, to, opt for smaller designers, often women-owned designers, that when Taylor wears their outfits, they sell out within like 15 minutes. And that is power in its own. So embrace cringe.
Yeah, I just like whenever I see Taylor dancing, I'm like, this girl's awkward, and that's okay.
And that's awesome. Like, we
know your strengths.
Yeah, know your limit, play within it. And
but also, like, it's okay. Like, she likes to dance.
Yes.
That doesn't mean, so it doesn't, she should be able to like dance, or like when she's the only one standing up at the award show, like throwing her hands in the air. I bless her. But yes, I think she is kind of cringe. And like, I think that, when people talk about, like she's always talking about a heartbreak, like get over it, like how old are you, blah blah blah. I'm like, it's good to tell, like it's good to normalize being in your 30s and like having emotions, right?
Yes.
Like there's nothing wrong with having emotions in your 30s.
I think the whole point of life is that we in fact do not stop having emotions ever.
Yes. Right. Even though we pretend, I think that like somehow strong emotions should be, I don't know, like quarantined to like your teen years, and then maybe in your 20s you can have some emotions, but then you have to start growing up and like just working all the time. And she manages to like funnel the emotions into the work. And that's another conversation about how much she likes to work, which she does.
Yeah. And also, then also in her fashion, like I've seen, critique of, like why hasn't her style, matured relative to her age? And it's like, certain items of clothing shouldn't be off limits to you because you hit a certain age.
Yeah. Okay. So next question is kind of a like expansion of this first question.
Okay.
Talking about all of our ideas together. So this one's from Kira.
First of all, love this crossover event. I would love to hear more from Sarah about the concept she's touched on in the past, about how Taylor Swift could be your high fashion icon, but she doesn't want to be, and how this idea has remained pretty constant throughout her career as she's grown up in the public eye, and particularly how it relates to the curation of her image and her career.
Okay, so can you expand on this idea a little bit about how she could be much more high fashion if she wanted to, but she doesn't?
I mean, I think the common query is, why is Taylor Swift, woman of infinite resources, still dressing intentionally, perhaps like below stature? Like, why isn't she out here like in street style, wearing a freshly ripped runway outfit? Why is she wearing something from Free People? What's the goal or the intent behind that? And also like, why with all of her power, influence, and capabilities is she not harnessing fashion in a way that certain people in fashion circles would like to see her do so? In comparison to name your it girl of the moment who's, avant-garde fashion that you currently admire. And I think that Taylor does do a great job of harnessing fashion for her own means in the ways that are, meaningful to her on the sphere and level that makes sense within her contained universe of aesthetics. I think she's been really effective at, orchestrating and commanding, this 3-hour show that neatly time travels through all of these distinct versions of herself that she's been, over the last 20 years of her career, which I guess like the long-winded way of saying is this, which I think, culture study appreciates, is the barometer for what shakes the earth in Taylor's world aesthetically is just, it's simply different than other celebrities. The scale is like inverted almost to the point where the more mundane the change, the bigger the reaction. At like her hair, like I'll just as one example of her image, Taylor making her hair straight in 2012 and getting bangs was like this record scratch, capital B, capital D, big deal. Like that was a big deal. And then like shedding the ringlets that she became known for and like was very recognized for. And also I think was like one of the earliest things that, fans sought to imitate, again, because it's a very easy thing, like to, just for instance, my mother put, those like 1/4-inch foam rollers in my head and I laid down and had them pressed into my scalp overnight in, a valiant effort to feel more like her. So subsequently, then also cutting her hair into a bob, also huge, gigantic, crazy deal. And like when I say this out loud, it sounds so pedestrian because you have like quote unquote it girls dyeing their hair, trying on new trends, morphing before our eyes every day in order to be interesting. And I highlight this style journey in my book. But you can reach back all the way to, Taylor's earliest days in her career where she built, that outfit formula of, young female country singer. And she did it through her style. And I think what myself and a lot of fans appreciate is that while Taylor likes to, and then maybe also sort of resents this requisite for reinvention, is that her street style specifically does tend to lean closer towards the everyday and the conventional than I think people perhaps feel that she should be dressing as a celebrity, which is also so strange because if she was out here flaunting like all of these high-end designer like things, it would also feel like, oh, she's so out of touch.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, and that gets into the like, can she do anything right conversation.
For sure.
Which I've written about on Culture Study. But I think that sometimes we forget that like celebrities have preferences.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're like, all celebrities should like the same things about being a celebrity.
Yeah.
And so I think someone like Rihanna loves fucking around with fashion. Loves it. It gives her so much pleasure. Whereas I think my interpretation of how Taylor approaches fashion is similar to how she approaches her lyrics and just general, like she thinks of it as a game, like where she can be clever. The thing that gives her pleasure is more of that like planning. Do you know what I mean? Instead of like, I'm going to like bust some people's eyeballs or like change the idea of what flattering might be.
Sure.
All of those different things. Like that's not her game.
I think her career is just inherently built on making authenticity marketable. Yeah. I describe it as like she's friend-shaped and she wants to be seen that way. And maybe, in light of her wanting people to be like afraid of her per Torture Poets track 10.
Yeah.
That may be in question. So, but like when people say she's intentionally dressing down to seem more appealing, I say like, yes, that's true. But just like how she kind of reclaimed this term, calculating used to be this like really ugly word. And I don't know why her wanting to seem accessible in her fashion, it just seems like the latest like Pokemon evolution of that criticism of that word. And just why I just don't think that she needs to change something that's not only, profitably parasocial, but also something that, maintains something that is true for you. And I think, the pantsless trend creates talk and intrigue, but, but Taylor Swift creates talk by breathing. So like, why wouldn't you just look cute when you're doing it? And like a recognizable version of yourself that fans are like, yes, that's Taylor. I recognize her.
Right. So like, I think like I put her too in this long lineage of quasi girls next door, right? Like no one's like, why is Reese Witherspoon not wearing more high fashion? It's because it's not her image. It's not who, like, that does not fit with how she has constructed her image to, like, wear things like that.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that Taylor Swift has a desire to be wearing high fashion and she's like, oh, well, I can't because like it won't fit with my girl next door image. Like she does actually, I think, push some of those boundaries in terms of like, she's not always dressing preppy. She's not always doing dark academia. She's doing all sorts of different interesting things to my mind as, you know, like someone who is not super plugged into high fashion. But I can see how someone might think like, oh, she could be so much more experimental. But that's not who she is.
Yeah. And I mean, sure, like a fashion editorial moment for the New York streets would be super fun to see her experiment with and play with. But like that's where those opportunities.
That's where you get to play with
That's where she gets to play with that. And I just think that she feels more comfortable wearing what she wants to wear, and that fans find it more fun and interesting when it's like, yes, I too would like that top. I could wear that.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the actual album.
Okay.
There are 31 songs. I admit that I have mostly dedicated myself to the boundaries of the traditional album, the single album before it became double album, and how they contribute to the overall Taylor mythology. So let's hear from Leslie about this.
I read the New York Times review of the album that had the headline, "The Tortured Poets Department Needed an Editor." And that's a critique that I feel about a lot of media these days, and I liked this album. Digital media seems to incentivize quick production and gives us no boundaries. Albums and songs can be any length, books can be produced extremely quickly, etc. It brings to mind the creativity advice that boundaries and limits actually feed creativity and don't limit it. In the case of this album, I think Taylor Swift's huge fan base enables her to create whatever she wants and still succeed. And that could be a blessing and it could be a curse. But what do y'all think?
All right. As someone who writes a newsletter that publishes twice a week, I have thoughts on this. The answer that I have is somewhat about Taylor and somewhat not about Taylor, because I think that the question asker is correct that the way that the current industry operates, and this includes newsletters, it includes podcasts, like unless you are producing, you are not making an income. And so because we do not have apparati that support people even when they are not releasing product, it has created this compulsion that like you have to be producing all the time. And I think that it's true. Like I would write better stuff if I wrote only twice a month, that sort of thing. But it wouldn't create the same sort of engagement with me, engagement with the community, all that sort of thing. And I think that like sometimes people who are making that argument about like less can be so much more, I absolutely agree. But the way that the market operates does not support that. And so in some ways, what's happening with the sheer amount of product that Taylor is releasing is an extension of that logic. Here's how I would have done it. I think the album itself is really interesting. I think like what I have been listening to as the album, it used to be that you would have all of these other songs that didn't make the album, and then you would release them like several years later as like B-sides, outtakes, like they would be secondary content that informed the primary content, but still like understood as secondary, like stuff that did not make the cut. And I think what Taylor is somewhat doing, and maybe this is part of the like she needs an editor critique, is she's making everything primary content.
Yeah.
What's your take on this? Especially as someone who is a content creator.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that restraint is a skill set. That is, and that's one I don't have. So like I admire people who are, concise and who are capable of getting all of their feelings across in, a tweet or less. And that's admirable and that's a skill set. But I would just say that like, and so yes, having the space to produce less and have that be more meaningful as its own standalone is a blessing. And I think Taylor has that runway. In truth, like she is Taylor Swift. She has that runway. Should she have wanted to take it? She has that. But I think
100%.
But I think right now, Taylor feels comfortable being able to take advantage of the momentum that she has to make art that will undoubtedly be successful, but doesn't need to be made with a checklist in mind. And we saw that with like Folklore and we saw that with Evermore. And strangely, I think being boundaryless has seen her in this crazily hyperdrive of creativity. Like, bear in mind that, like, since switching labels following the fallout from her masters with Big Machine, she has produced 1.5 times her life's work from Big Machine in half the amount of time, which is insane.
Yeah.
That's a crazy, crazy statistic.
Yeah.
But like she once famously said during Lover that Lover would be her last chance to grasp at a truly commercially successful album. And that was in 2019. And whether because she thought, you know, or feared public opinion would no longer permit her to be successful, or, you know, the nothing new Clara Bow anxiety of being replaced by someone younger and more interesting, as, you know, pop tends to favor the young, was rearing its ugly head. But, you know, of course, we're now on the other side of Lover. And she's, you know, created multiple albums on the back of artistic creativity without a to-do list. And I think it must feel so incredible for her to be able to make art without boundaries and trust that at least like a huge subset of her fans will be seated for this journey. And I think that the point on Poets about needing an editor is like, that very well may be true. But I think the point is that she did not want an editor. And this album is, you know, bloated by artistic choice and not artistic error.
That is such a great way of framing it, that like she is choosing to be excessive here. Like she wants it to be too much.
Yes.
In terms of emotion, songs.
Too much.
Like, yes, absolutely.
I just, you know.
And that's, she's shutting the door though. She said this multiple times. Like, I needed to get it out.
Yes.
Like I needed to get all of these emotions out. And now I want to shut the door on that period in my life.
For sure. And I think, you know, she needed to get this album out with as many eyes as are on her as possible, so that, you know, the runway for TS12, you know, whenever she decides to put it out, you know, she's able to breathe a little clearer, you know, with the elephant in the, you know, studio with her of like, you know, this monumental breakup that everybody wants to know all about. And, you know, that's kind of past her. But I just think we have 1989, like the recent re-record 1989, like is like very close in our rearview mirror. And I would call 1989 standard her tightest, like most patent leather polished piece of pop. And like Taylor has demonstrated she knows how to write a concise and snappy pop song. So she's fully capable. We know that she is capable of putting, you know, an entire world in, you know, a single line. And she's exhibited that like many times over. So this album, you know, effectively this is an album capturing a woman's descent into madness. And I just, why should an album like that be concise?
Right. Well, and it's also one of those things that I think is hard to understand in the moment of release and maybe becomes more legible in the context of her discography looking back. I think about how people talk about like when Bob Dylan went Christian and like had this whole Christian period in the 1980s, right? Like you're like, that happened. Like as an artist, you go through different periods, different styles, different modes of release, like all of these different things. And so I think like I understand why that is the conversation that people are having in this moment. But I think that the conversation will change as we get further away from this moment. The only thing I will say is that I often too feel the need, like, I just need to write this. I need to write all of this, right? And then sometimes what I really needed to do was to write the paragraph and then delete it. And I needed to write it for me. And the piece became better for me. Like, and a lot of writers I know do this. They keep it in like a separate Google Doc because they're like, that was such a good paragraph. I just can't get rid of it, right? So they keep the baby just to keep it around just in case. Yeah. But the end piece is better because they edited it. And so like, yes, would this have been a tighter, more coherent project if she cut the number of songs in half? Arguably. Is she doing something different by keeping it long? Is she speaking differently by keeping it long the way that she has?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. She has simply proven herself as an artist that she has that in her toolkit. And for her to intentionally not wield that here says something. And in the moment, perhaps the criticisms are completely valid. But when you do the bird's eye lens, looking at, an artist's discography over the course of many decades, I think that this will be a really interesting time period. And, Reputation didn't get her flowers until, years out.
Totally.
And that's fine. Criticism in the moment, and then allowing, the art to steep over a period of time. And I think that that's also like kind of the intent with this too, is it's kind of like a time release album. I mean, it's 31 songs. Like, there's no way for you to have to, absorb everything that quickly. So I think, this is a slow time release medicinal album that will take a long, long time for us to kind of all wrap our brains around and come down from. And that's, again,
a medicinal album.
By design.
I kind of like that.
Thanks.
All right. Let's hear the last question. And it's about like the vibe of the album versus the Taylor that maybe is out there living her own life right now. This question comes from Kayla.
Might the Tortured Poets department represent a slide downwards from the popularity Taylor Swift reached? I have a feeling the record isn't going to be a fan favorite. I found myself disappointed on first listen, which is fine, you can't win them all. I can't help but think about how her star image may be impacting how I'm receiving it. She's oversaturated even to a huge fan like myself. She's a newly minted billionaire who's seemingly constantly winning, yet this album suggests her current era is sad. I know it's art, but it doesn't seem to reflect what I'm seeing in her public image right now.
Okay, I love this question because we compare it with the release on YouTube Shorts, which is like this thing on YouTube that is trying to compete with TikTok and clearly paid Taylor Swift some money to release a little short video on YouTube Shorts of all of these snippets of her life over it looks like the last 6 months, right? And to me, it is such forceful counter-programming of the vibes of Tortured Poets.
100%.
It's like, yes.
100%.
It's like, I'm having a great time, actually.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I talked about this on my Instagram too, how it harkens back. It does a few jobs. One, it harkens back to, her MySpace days where, in the early days of her career, what made her stand out was, her presence online, cultivating that fan connection very early on. And she, had this MySpace page, and she would upload these like supercuts of like vlogs from the road, with little like home clips. Totally. And one, to me, it harkens back to that time, which is nice for like an OG fan to recognize. And two, it also like serves as this really nice reminder to people of, again, her saying, this chapter in my life is over. I closed the door on this time period. I needed to make this album because this is what I was living in. And now my life looks much different. I think it's an incredibly gutsy move to release an album that doesn't seem particularly manufactured for widespread appeal or praise. And we've seen, Poets to me it's a very dense album. And I think for people who are invested in her cinematic universe, we want to understand, and we are up to the job of poring over the lore, untangling all the flowery language, going through all the metaphors that are on display. And Taylor Swift is a chronic overachiever people pleaser. And I'm like raising my hand as somebody who is like part of that group. So I just don't think you can ever fully count her out of like wanting to be liked. But I think the evolution of her artistry on display here is that she did not put out this album necessarily to be liked. And I think it's particularly frightening to do when the opportunity to make something palatable to this newly found audience who's, bought into your corner of pop culture and are hanging on every word you say, it would be easier to like gently usher them in like to this like second wave of fandom that you've gotten. But I just think she's, created this art that she needed, to make in a hurry with all of this attention that she had on her to make, more space and create more atmosphere for oxygen for her next project. And I think, I think it's understandably very grating to hear complaints from people who like, for someone who like seemingly has it all and has been very publicly riding a professional high, that's, been stunningly maintained to the point of it, being a masterclass in narrative containment. But unfortunately, and I think what this album proves is that you can't buy your way out of depression.
Yeah. No, this is like, I love how people are like, she has nothing to be sad about. I'm like, people, successful people are sad all the
time.
Like, that's like a very common thing amongst successful people, because they're working all the time, but also because they have heartbreak like everyone else in the world. But I think that okay, here's one thing that I've been thinking about. Like a lot of people in their 30s, you reach a point, and I think this is particularly true from people who have succeeded according to society's understanding of what success should look like, right? Like fit themselves into the parameters. You find a point where you look around and you think like, okay, I did what everyone else said I should do, and I did it really well. But do I have any sense of what I actually like? Do I have any sense of who I actually am outside of other people's expectations for me? And I think, and this actually contributes to some of like the feeling of authenticity and relatability, is that she is going through that right now. She's like, I'm figuring out what I actually like, who I am.
Yeah.
And what that looks like. And this sort of catharsis is necessary for it. But then also, we can apply this to the style. We can apply this to, I think, the way she's talked about this publicly, so I don't feel creepy talking about it. But like she really grappled with her body image for a long time and feeling really bad about like putting things into her body because she wanted to look like the models that were exemplars of femininity to her. And saying, no, I need to eat for power. I need to eat for stamina. I need to eat like and feel comfortable in this body. And in a lot of ways, it feels like she is arriving at that point in her music too, or even just in her image too. Well, who do I feel comfortable with?
Yeah.
What is my version of this love story?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and understandable if you haven't gotten that far, because it's like wedged deep, deep down, like in the 31 song track list. But I think it's what makes The Prophecy so tragic is, she talks about in that song, like, I don't want money. I just want somebody who wants my company.
Yeah.
She went through one of the most significant personal upheavals in her life. And she had to deal with the fallout of it in real time with, tens of thousands, millions of people either in stadiums watching her every move on like big stadium screens, like trying to interpret, whatever from the glassiness of her eyes during a particular song, or she was dealing with something really hard. And I just think having The Prophecy on this album is really, really, telling and so tragic. And it's just like having billions of dollars doesn't give you immunity from, the walking red flags and leather jackets and cigarettes in your life. Like, from having like these like British men, like saying, promising you the world. And like, it doesn't shield you. Having money doesn't shield you from some British dude stomping all over your heart when you're already at your worst.
No, I think there's this weird assumption that like, oh, she's Taylor Swift, every guy would just want to be with her all the time. And it's very clear that like sometimes romantic partners have weird stuff of like self-sabotage or like resentment and all sorts of things. Like while you're listening to this, you have to forget that she is a billionaire, because like it doesn't matter. You can still get screwed over in your relationship if you have a lot of money and you're beautiful, right? Like that doesn't make you immune.
I would in fact like argue that it makes your mistakes and your quote unquote failures magnified that much more, because you're trying to be a human and you're grading against all of these expectations and people that tell you you're actually not human because you have XYZ on your resume and all you want. And I think all that she wants in this work especially is for people to recognize the human of it all.
And I don't think she wants sympathy per se, right? Because I think sometimes the sadness in these songs in particular, I have seen it interpreted as like, oh, she wants us to feel sorry for her. And I don't think that's what she wants, right? I think she wants to express a complexity of emotion that is relatable to a lot of people. Like listening to these songs really took me back to a lot of fucked up relationships.
So many, right? So many.
Like that is useful. And it is useful. It is a useful tool for me to revisit them and to be able to see them with this perspective of like, man, it felt so intense and shitty in that moment. And I am so much stronger now than I was then.
I think the idealized pipeline for Taylor when it comes to, ingesting her art is that she writes to understand herself. She releases it so other people can understand her. We sit with it so that we can understand ourselves, and then ultimately take that art from her and make it about that connective tissue between our two shared experiences, so that it's not about guy who tried to use your mutual friend as a drug dealer who, like that it's not about that guy anymore. Like it's
about a guy with that sort of behavior, but not that exact sort of behavior, right?
Yeah. It's meant to transcend and become like about, these were my experiences. I'm sure you've experienced them too. Let's experience them together so that we can get over it.
Yeah. It's about feeling your feelings, which is important, I think, no matter your age, like validating feeling your feelings.
Yeah.
And then also that understanding that like there's another era beyond this one that feels really claustrophobic. It feels impossible. Like there will be more life. There will be more eras to your life. That sounds cheesy, but it's so real. Like I think of my life in those terms. And like you don't have to have I guess my aesthetic is like I used to wear more like sevens jeans in the 2000s, and then I was in my skinny jean era. And now I'm like somewhere in between. I like can't go full
you're
wide
in your
again.
gardening overall.
Yeah, I'm in my gardening overall garden witch era.
And but like, again, like you're able to, not to bring it all back to fashion, but you're able to, identify parts of your life with, how you were expressing yourself. And part of that expression was what you were wearing.
Yeah.
There are so many moments, I look back on my life and I can remember, when I used to only wear eyeliner in the waterline and nothing else.
That's an era.
And that's an era. Like that was a time.
Yep.
I remember, being told when I was very, very young and I was, in ballet classes and being told like, oh, you're in ballet because you're a girl and that's why you don't wear blue. And then proceed, like smash cut, quits ballet, plays soccer, exclusively wears blue denim, blue everything. And like you're dressing for an era and you're dressing to prove a point and you're dressing as part of your personality and your values and what you want to communicate about your life and your preferences. And that it's just beautiful. Language of fashion.
I love it. This is a perfect place for us to end the ep. I have had so much fun talking with you. I cannot wait to get my hands on the book, and everyone follow the Instagram account. It's like the highlight of my day. I just love looking at it.
Thank you.
And
so
your
much.
commentary is so smart.
That's so nice.
So if people want to find you, what's the handle for the Instagram account? One more time.
It's Taylor Swift Styled, and I am also on taylorswiftstyled.com, and my book, Taylor Swift Style, Fashion Through the Eras, which is, the definitive Swiftie style book. It's out October 8th. It's available for pre-order now. And I just fully believe it's this stunningly packaged thing that's beautiful inside and out. And I'm really, really proud of it. And I can't wait for people to dive into the nuance and the discussion and how, this incredibly savvy, smart person has crafted such a compelling lifetime of style and music.
Seriously, this was so fantastic. It was such an honor. Thank you so much for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Right now, over at the podcast Substack, we are talking about all of our opinions about this album. And we can talk about things that we didn't get to. If you asked a question that didn't get answered here, how you would reorder the album. Are you listening to just the first album like I am? What your favorite Taylor Swift aesthetic is, whether or not you have ever found out that you own something that Taylor Swift also owns. It's all fair game, and it's all over at culturestudypod.substack.com. And also a reminder that we have so many great episodes in the works, like an exploration of generational nostalgia, a deep dive on all of the discourse about the British royal family and how it differs from place to place, and a big grab bag episode that we're calling Strong Opinions About Trivial Shit. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, check the show notes for a link to our Google form, or type in tinyurl.com/culturestudypod. The full version of today's episode is free for everyone. So if you like what you heard and you want to support the show, again, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and you get a big discount if you're already a Culture Study subscriber. Just go to your email and look for Culture Study promo code, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive Ask Anne Anything segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. If you're already a paid subscriber, thank you. Don't forget to head to culturestudypod.substack.com to take full advantage of all your perks. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear, and you can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod. Melody, is there anything that we missed? Are we good?
No, it was amazing. I'm so happy.
Melody, were you surprised by the 2 Travis songs?
Yes. I still haven't decided what I think about them, except that So High School keeps getting stuck in my head. So I guess I like it. The Alchemy honestly feels a little bit like I need to write a song about Travis. So like I'm going to just like write one real quick. It doesn't feel like fully baked to me. But I think So High School is very fun.
I like that So High School sounds like a song that Travis would like.
Totally. I'm convinced that's where it started.
I think the thing that's most misunderstood about Tortured Poets is that it is like Tortured Poets is simultaneously the most fucked up shit you will ever hear in your life and like top tier like stand-up comedy hours. Like there's there's so many things that are so funny that people
I'm having his baby is the funniest thing she has ever done.
That's the funniest thing. Like, you know how to ball. I know Aristotle.
It's like, oh my god. I literally like screamed. Not like, oh my god, I screamed, but like I screamed.
No, I screamed.
Heard that part.
The Jehovah's Witness line.
Yeah, that was very good.
I was crying.
Yeah.
I was like, and like people are taking it tattooed golden retriever. Like it's
so, like no AI wrote these lyrics. Like, are you kidding me? Like,
it's and like this is what I was talking about with like the cringe. Like you don't understand. Mm-hmm. She's being funny. Like
yes. And the number of songs she has about men not laughing at her jokes. And like
this woman. This woman wants you to think that she's funny. If there's anything inherent to like her discography, it's damn it, somebody laugh at my jokes.
But she's cheesy, and that's okay. Like she's a dad joke. Like she's like dad joke personified, you know? Like totally. And it's totally okay.
Yes.
Well, we're going to include some of this as like a bonus Easter egg in our podcast.
Oh my gosh.
A vault track, if you will.
Yeah, this is our vault track at the end of the pod.